Welcome to the Fortean Winds podcast, where we talk about UFOs and all the related high strangeness. I go by Bones, and with us, as always, is RamX.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Ram. It's good to talk to you, and we are together again to talk about a myriad of things. I don't know where to start.
That's a good way to get somewhere you've never been.
That's right, sir. You know, I wanted to kind of get back to our roots and talk about Fort a little bit. Charles Fort, the godfather of ufology, I guess you could call him, right?
You couldn't have picked a better time to get us back to our roots, huh? Like, we've been going off the rails a little bit, talking about some current events, which I don't think we need to talk about because we were concerned that that news was going to get lost. People were saying, shut up. And we have two rules in America. You know, we have a global audience, so maybe they don't know this about us. We have two rules here. And number one is don't tell me what to say. Number two is don't touch my guns.
Right.
That's what happens when you break rule one. Anyway, we can move on from that and get back to... This was a great idea to get back to Fortean stuff because the world did not move on from it, and it's evolving. So we can get back to what we do best.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, we could also choose to just talk and speculate about the so-called disclosure that's never coming, but I think that's pretty much a waste of time.
Yes. I think that's one thing that we've decided is we were talking about where to go with this show next and how to not get caught up in this nonsense that disclosure is just around the corner. And that is kind of, it's two things. It's both a grift and it's a political movement. So you really have to decide whether you want to be involved because there is a political movement in there that's pushing for greater transparency in the government. And that's not a bad thing.
Nope.
But based on the precedent and all of the current evidence, we don't think that that is imminent in any way. So I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste my life. I don't want to waste my curiosity on that portion of the UFO phenomenon.
Right. Or just waste your energy. There's so many other things you could focus on.
Absolutely. And if you're really interested in UFOs, there are people studying the science of UFOs and putting out papers, and you can go find those. Yeah.
Right.
So to pretend like it's all whatever social media and History Channel is presenting it as is disingenuous at best. Some of the paranormal studies that we've discussed, those EVP papers that we put out from the CIA, I mean, those are like 50 years old.
Yeah.
And yet here I was going, Argos real, Argos not, before I began this. Like, that should be pretty much old hat to everyone because those studies have existed for a long time with all of the data and how to do it.
Right.
You know, to pretend like this stuff doesn't exist is just falling for this false illusion that, you know, it's falling for this licorice mustache. It's this barely disguised idea that this stuff doesn't exist, right? Like, and you can choose. The only way that something like that exists is if people don't want to believe it.
Right.
That's one of the final bosses of the UFO phenomenon and UFO disclosure is getting people to want to believe it. And I don't know how you change that. How do you instill the public with curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of comes in waves too. You know, it's strange that way. Maybe that's life. You know, things come in waves or are developed in waves. But it's just it surges. Like we suddenly have this kind of interest in UFOs and the phenomenon, and then it kind of dies down a little bit, and then it comes back and then kind of penetrates popular culture, and then it fades away again.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's by design or it's just...
Right, and then here we can begin talking about Forteans, because our approach to Fortean phenomenon, which is really becoming something, I think, in the modern era known as anomalistics, and people are trying to make it a little bit more official. And I think that's great. I love it. If there's one thing that I will cop to being an expert on, it's on how to research the paranormal. I don't know how anyone could be an expert on the paranormal or on UFOs when I couldn't tell you what they are.
Right.
But I am an expert on how to research that stuff in order to get more data, in order to move forward in your research and get somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, you learned how to remove that licorice mustache and use it as a licorice whip.
Yeah, and this is funny to be doing this. What is a Fortean at the end of all this? It kind of works out. I mean, it was a great idea because
Yeah.
I think we got to the end of what would have been our UFO research. And I want to tell people that, and I don't want to play this game with them and be disingenuous with them about what's next and what, we can give you UFO news. We can give you our analysis of UFO news, but you're capable of reading the news. You're capable of critical thinking. And our audience is smarter than that. Our audience is about 2.5 times the average grade level in comprehension of of the average media show,
Yeah, I believe that. For sure.
which is great. I mean, this show worked out in ways that I couldn't have possibly imagined. And it wasn't all an accident, I guess. I think that in the end, and I went through that firewall that we talked about. And that was really the end of it. That getting through that was really the end of it. And then the consciousness episode afterwards. And that
Right.
led into more contact for me. And I want to talk about that and, unpack that for a certain part of our audience at some point and then probably delete it. Because I'm uncomfortable with that. You and I were talking about
Yeah.
that before this. Like, I'm uncomfortable with being a reporter on contact. The contact did to me feel personal, even if the messages didn't feel personal in nature. It felt like the symbols that were presented were intended for me so that I could
Okay.
understand. And I think if I presented it in that way, the audience would take it literally. And there is both a literal way to take it, there's a symbolic way to take it, there's a scientific way to take it.
Did you feel like it was kind of the typical kind of trickster persona? Or
No. Yes and no. That's the way I would say it. Like, I think that trickster persona is also a way to teach you something or tell you something. And
okay.
I think that all of those sorts of behaviors were there, but we sort of got through it and we ended up in a state of alignment that I just want to be in with it all. Like, I don't actually want it to change.
Right.
And I think messing with it anymore or really even talking about it and trying to do something with it, trying to prove it, like that's really the idea that you're trying to prove UFOs. I feel really bad for some of the past UFO researchers who gave their lives over to detailing these UFO encounters in a scientific manner and collecting all of that scientific data only for the public to disregard it.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that with the belief that if they just collected enough data, and that's a good faith belief, a good faith scientific belief, that if I just collect enough data and if I just collect enough proof, the public will believe me.
Right.
And then I can be the one to break the UFO case, right?
Right. Right. It can't be approached that way. It needs to be approached kind of like like the academic world, where you try to build on the narrative. I
Yes.
mean, you don't do research just to get a show on the History Channel. You do research to build upon a larger body of research.
Yes, but when you have moving goalposts in academia, there's no
True.
endpoint in any of those places for when there's enough data to say, yes, that was an anomalous object.
True.
Yes, the anomalous object emitted EMF radiation. Like, would be debate about that today.
Yeah, and that brings us back to the Charles Fort thing, because like, wasn't that one of his big positions was that there was dogma within academia?
Yeah, by throwing out the dogma, Fort was able to see things a lot differently. So how did Fort start? Fort really started by collecting news sources. They collected newspaper clippings of weird and anomalous stories that he would collect when he'd go to the library every day. He wasn't like Keel. He wasn't a field researcher. He was more of a librarian and an amateur researcher. And he cataloged thousands of these anomalies. And then he started to notice patterns, the same ones that we notice today.
Yeah, and he truly was the godfather of ufology. I mean, he recorded this anomalous stuff and kind of questioned too why is this being pushed aside? Why isn't this being regarded?
Yeah, we did an episode on how UFO research is conducted. And UFO research is conducted by collecting lots of different UFO data and then looking for patterns. So we did date and time correlations, we did things like that. Well, that was what Fort was doing. He was saying, okay, like here, one of the most basic ones is what shape did they see? If someone saw a triangle in the sky back in 1920, that was a pretty big deal. There wasn't really a correlation. They weren't like, that was a drone.
Right, right.
So Fort started to notice things like that. And then he also started to note cases of things like spontaneous human combustion. And it's notable that like Fort was born in 1874 and he died in 1932. He was doing a lot of his research in the early 1900s and published his first book, Book of the Damned, in 1919. That was a collection of a lot of these stories. At that time, and we've discussed this when we talked about cryptid research and when we're pulling information about things like the Mothman or Bigfoot from 1800 or 1900 news sources. Those newspapers tended to be a little more sensational at the time. They were competing for eyeballs the same way websites do today. So right. Sometimes those stories were embellished, or sometimes they were just repeating something some guy said who was drunk. You know, that was right. The whole news source. But other times they were recording something where there was multiple witnesses and it met our standard of evidence. And what Fort would notice would be there'd be a crazy story over here in like Idaho, and then he'd find another news source in like the UK where two people were unlikely to have seen the same news sources, where the person was maybe a more rural person who wasn't accessing, you know, big city newspapers. There was no internet. So them reporting the same thing as this person was anomalous.
Right.
And then Fort was the first one to really observe a pattern of ball lightning, which is being studied today. It comes up a lot in UFO research, and it's got various causes. And then there's also what looks like anomalous ball lightning as well. So Fort really was the one who sort of discovered, we can't really say he discovered it, but he popularized the research right. of ball lightning.
Yep.
And the heart of Fort's work is to really throw out dogma. And that includes scientific dogma and religious dogma. And look at how long it took us to catch on to really what that meant, you know, and how much further it took us once it did.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, and with that, you know, 19th century realization of how dogma can kind of bound your thinking, I think historically that was a huge position to take. I mean, it was basically he's trying to free minds. He's trying to get people talking about things that people didn't want to talk about.
And if we look at Fort in the context of his era, so spiritualism was getting big at the time, right. And then there was Darwin, the evolution. Yeah. Religion was obviously very popular too. So there was all these different influences. And then you had science really getting in the Industrial Revolution. And this is where we begin this sort of conflict between materialism and the metaphysical too, which is something that holds us back in both science and our spiritual development, I believe, is the need to separate those two things.
Yeah, I think another key point to Fort's work was that, you know, he just encouraged curiosity, right? He didn't judge when someone experienced some type of phenomenon. He took it seriously. He didn't just, you know, throw a label on someone. He was trying to promote openness.
In our cryptid episodes, we talked about how Teddy Roosevelt was one of the people that collected some good Sasquatch research.
Right.
And so that's a good example, when we pointed out at the time, of someone who prioritized data over theory. And what he did was he went around and he started asking people who were familiar with the frontier and some of the natives, all right, what crazy stuff have you seen? And he didn't judge that. He used open-mindedness, and he acted more like a scribe. He just recorded what they said. Once you record enough stories, you then start to analyze them. This is sort of how data science works for everything today. But they were doing it for the anomalous back then. And there was a guy who started even before them, before Fort, who I would argue is the true first Fortean, and that is Robert Kirk.
Okay, yeah. So Robert Kirk was the Scottish folklorist.
Yeah, so Robert Kirk was the minister at Aberfoyle, and he was born in 1644. He died in 1692. He was a minister, a scholar, a folklorist. And the reason we would call him the first Fortean is because he did basically what I just described Teddy Roosevelt is doing for fairies.
Right.
And he was the author of The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. And this book is legendary in Fortean circles. And that's exactly what he did. He went around in the British Isles and he was talking to a lot of people who would have been familiar with Celtic traditions. And they would refer to these fairies as the good people. And I am dying to do a whole episode on fairies. But for now, let's just say that Robert Kirk's work is what later Forteans, such as Valet and Keel and Tonnies and us, would use to point to the fact that fairies and UAP and things like angels are all the same types of anomalous entities.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, especially when you think back of his era. I mean, he had to be someone of a certain position to even be able to openly research that stuff, you'd think.
Yeah, it's pretty wild that he was a minister so long before Charles Fort. Kirk cataloged non-human intelligences that were interacting with humans. He also recorded what I would call the first alien abduction case, which I've mentioned before, and I think we need to do a deep dive into this. It's the case of Jacob Jacobson, really famous in Fortean and ufology circles. And what's really interesting about that case, if you look into it, I can put a link to a really good video on it. What I find really interesting about that case that I would like you to take note of is the red light object that was in the room, which gets described in alien abduction cases too, but here it was fairies. Kirk also collected firsthand witness accounts. So that's primary source material. That's what any historian would say. That's what any researcher or investigator would say. That's primary source material, and that's the best you're ever going to get from anything historical. And that was from the rural Scottish Highlands. And he proposed that these beings existed in a middle nature, which is now what we're calling the space in between, the space between spaces, as above, so below. It was this space between spaces, which is interdimensional, if you will. I think that word is very limited. And in my contacts, the beings tell me that it's too limited. Outside of space and time would be more accurate.
Right, right.
And Kirk noted that these beings were neither material nor fully immaterial. It was something in between. And in other cultures, they don't get hung up on this. We don't know the scientific method by which that happens, even though quantum would explain to all of it, right? But we say we don't know the scientific method by which that happens, so it can't exist. There can't be this connection between the immaterial and the material, which is completely ridiculous because we don't know what it is. It doesn't exist. I mean, that's like closing your eyes and saying everything around you disappeared.
Right.
And Kirk refused to dismiss folk accounts, despite being a Presbyterian minister during a skeptical, often superstitious era, which was really unique at the time.
Yeah, there's kind of a contrast when you think about the era that Kirk lived in compared to Fort. You know, Fort was kind of in the Gilded Age where information was flowing a lot faster than it ever has, and industry was growing at an incredible speed. You know.
And I think it's really notable that Robert Kirk didn't consider these things angels or demons. He considered them a category all of his own. And that's truly open-minded for someone at the time.
Right.
He didn't resolve anomalies into simple categories, and I have learned that is definitely the best move. Don't assume that you can map the cosmology of the universe. You're a human.
Right, right.
And Ford and Kirk were both okay with saying, we don't know. And I think I'm becoming okay with that. Like, I don't know, and that's okay. And in true Fortean fashion, Kirk's death was anomalous. As the story goes, he was found dead in 1692, walking near a fairy hill. And the local legends would say that he wasn't dead at all, that the fairies came and took him away for saying too much about what they were and who they are.
Yeah, right.
Kirk became part of the lore. And by the way, I think some of those rumors about his death were not well supported by the research, but he became part of the lore. He became a character, right? And we find this with a bunch of Forteans, and I found this with myself, right? You end up becoming a character in the play. And we're going to talk about Keel next, right? Because Keel comes up, and he's sort of the Hunter S. Thompson, I would say, of Fortean research.
Wait, what does that mean?
Right. So Hunter S. Thompson was famous for gonzo journalism. And he went and rode with the Hells Angels and then wrote about the Hells Angels while he was becoming a sort of pseudo Hells Angel. And Keel went and wrote about the phenomenon in the Mothman prophecies as he was researching it and as he was becoming a part of the phenomenon. Yeah. He was becoming a character in the play.
Sure, yeah. It's kind of like, in anthropology, they call that reflexivity, where if you're studying a culture, there's a certain part of you, a lot of them used to kind of live with them to learn about their culture. And then you have to study how you're relating to this new culture and how you functioned in it. Talking about the error of Fort too, there was so much work going on. There's Fraser, James Fraser. He's the one who wrote The Golden Bough, and it's almost like a dictionary for cultural anthropologists. And he recorded all kinds of different just religions and traditions in this really comprehensive book. So I mean, it was a movement.
Yeah, there was a movement in order to create an ethnography. Start to acknowledge different religions and record what they were saying, record what they were doing. And prior to that, the Catholic Church was considering all of that witchcraft, right? Just having a different religion would have been considered witchcraft, demons, whatever. So in these places where the Vatican was losing power, all of a sudden ethnography began to become a real thing. And then we start to notice similarities between religion. And I think this is sort of where we start to decode certain spiritual truths. This is just my own beliefs. And one of the things that Kirk's data helps us note from a scientific standpoint is that these witnesses had mind-altering effects. The fact that he recorded that hundreds of years ago from the same types of anomalous beings that are being recorded today in scientific studies is the best evidence that we will ever get the phenomenon was going on back then. It's all you're ever going to get, right? From historical source material. You're not going to get scientific data. It just doesn't exist. This is the best we get.
Yeah.
And if you're doing a scientific study, you would be remiss in not noting it.
Yeah, for sure.
But we started to discuss Keel. So John Alva Keel is sort of the godfather of this project. And my own understanding of the phenomenon took a quantum leap when I read the Mothman prophecies. And it was the beginning of sort of my own contact experiences, I think, too. That was something when I started to become more aware. So for me, I always have a very special connection with the Mothman prophecies. We've discussed it before. We've discussed how not everything in that book is accurate. It does give you a much more clear picture of what the phenomenon is and isn't.
Yeah, so, Mothman Prophecies was published in 1975, but he did a lot of work before then, too. And I always think, when I think of Keel, I also think of Valet. They kind of touched on similar things at a similar time. But he worked on kind of the same stuff. He talked about the folklore. He talked about the ultra-terrestrial, And that was the one thing that got me too, like the super spectrum that he would discuss in his later works.
To me, the big five of Fortean research is Robert Kirk first, Then comes Fort, and we call ourselves Fortean because his method of research is probably both well known for being associated with this. Then
Right.
comes Keel. Then comes Valet. In my opinion, Valet comes after Keel. You can hate me if
Okay.
you want. And then comes Tonnies, which we've discussed in the crypto terrestrial episode, and we think very highly of his work. So those are the
Yes.
big
It's
five to me.
Yeah, one of my favorite works was Tonnies' Crypto Terrestrials book.
And he did it the same way Fort did it, and the same way Keel did it. He collected all of the data. He looked for patterns. He developed hypotheses and theories off of the patterns. And then you attempt to test those hypotheses. And you can also attempt to test it with emerging research, which I think is most interesting. And what we tried to do with Fortean Winds was we said, okay, if we're right about this, then this will happen. And that happened a bunch of times, right? And we said, okay, look, we said on this episode, if this happens, we know that this part of the phenomenon is true. That happened. That's all we're ever going to get. That's proof. If we can say it before it happens, then that's it, right? So there are ways to test the data as well. And Tonnies did all of that. So really enjoy his work as well. But Keel traveled extensively. He went to Egypt. He went to Point Pleasant. That is what he's most well known for. But he traveled all around the country. He gave lectures. He chased monsters. And he was very proud of it. But in the end, he said, don't do this. Don't get involved in this. And he also developed some conclusions about the phenomenon that became very distorted. There's a magazine that we don't talk about, and I guess this is the perfect time to talk about it, and that's the Fortean Times. It's the most famous piece of media associated with Forteans, and we've never discussed it on the show. So what does that tell you? I don't consider it terribly serious. I think it's a cultural magazine, and it's kind of cool in that way. It's fun. Like, I think it's neat. That's why I don't talk about it. Like, I don't want to bash it, but don't confuse that with Fortean research. Forteans, they're mostly academics. There's a great article that I will link to about a journalist that goes to a Fortean convention and was expecting to hear all sorts of stories about Mothman and Bigfoot and the Sasquatch. And he said, I ended up at a convention full of skeptics. You weren't expecting that, were you? Probably more academics or Forteans than anything. You and I are both scholars.
Yep.
Although we don't act like it much. So since we're talking about Keel during that time period, and you've certainly heard us talk all about Keel before, our Mothman episode would probably be the best place to hear us talk about John Keel. But if we're talking about the timeline of Fortean, so around the same time, Jacques Vallée publishes Passport to Magonia. And Magonia is fairyland. Vallée makes this very strong connection between ufology and fairies, and he does so as a established, respected scientist.
Right.
And that gives all of what we're talking about so much more credibility, and we owe him a huge debt of gratitude for doing that, because obviously he put his own credibility on the line when he did that. He came out as an experiencer himself. He has seen structured craft. So imagine this, folks. Jacques Vallée, who is a scientist in several subjects and was an astronomer who witnessed a UFO at the observatory he was at, and then he witnessed a cover-up of that UFO that he was at. When he was younger, he witnessed a structured craft. He had every reason to believe that these were extraterrestrial. Yet it was Jacques Vallée who wrote the book Passport to Magonia, who said these things are the same things as fairies.
Right.
He is considered the greatest UFO researcher of all time.
Right. I mean, it just shows you his thought process. He didn't just jump to the easy conclusion. He kept with his scientific principles.
And he arrived at the same conclusion we did. He arrived at the same conclusion John Keel did. And I mentioned on the show how I wouldn't read Jacques Vallée until the end. And I was like, we ended up in the same ballpark, but I didn't want to have anything close to confirmation bias near me while we did this. Like, I wanted to do the same research that Teddy Roosevelt, Robert Kirk, and Robert Charles Fort did, and I wanted to do it independently of all of them, right? It's the only way you would ever trust it, and that's how Forteans are. And then once you arrive at the conclusion, I am not a believer. I'm a witness. Now I've witnessed paranormal stuff. I've witnessed UFO stuff. Like, there's nothing you can say or do to tell me that this subject is not real. It took that level of research, though, and then you can't stop us. But at the same time, the public is way back here in what are UFOs really real? So we've been we've been talking about where to take the show next. Like,
right. It's like it's the ultimate Fort maxim, right? Never form a belief.
Mm-hmm. Right. You don't form a belief. And we have a small UFO community that is filled with beliefs. And then we have a public that doesn't care. So that part of this subject is just getting less and less interesting to me all of the time. You know, bless their hearts. I wish them well on the road to transparency in government. But let's look at that in the context of our last episode. I mean, I don't think transparency is just around the corner.
Well, we do. We also have the Chris Bledsoes of the world who are proclaiming that something is going to, he's proclaiming cause and effect of reality here. So we have him to watch.
And the community has this idea that he is one of 5, 10 people in the world having this kind of contact. That is not true. So I appreciate that he has been validated. I appreciate that he is open about his contact. But you're talking about millions of people on this planet that are in touch with this phenomenon.
For sure.
In the exact same way. So please don't assume that everything that he said is coming directly from God. Like, he's having contact with something unknown, and he's interpreting it and reporting on it. And that's all an experiencer can do. But don't confuse this stuff with prophecy.
Right. Well, because he's gone into the belief. He's formed a belief. Like, where he's talking about dates now in Revelation.
It's the message and the narrative. It's assets and agents. When you talk about the relationship between us and we'll call them the non-human intelligences, and I only know about the ones that I know about, and those are the ones from outside of space and time. They tell me that there's other things too, and something in space and whatever, and that would make a lot of things make sense. If there was something at the top that was enforcing some set of rules, because I've always said it doesn't really make sense that all these different species or whatever would be coming to this planet and they'd all be operating by the same sorts of rules of engagement and secrecy. Like, that doesn't really make sense. It has to be one thing, but it would make more sense if it was one thing enforcing a set of rules, a universe that I know nothing about. That makes a lot of sense, actually. They tell me it's something like that, right? But I only know the ones from outside of space and time. But that's all I can tell you about.
Right.
And I can only tell you what they tell me. So,
what
is that worth? Don't look at me like a guru. I don't have it all figured out.
Right.
I'm a Fortean, since we're talking about that. So what is a Fortean? Jeez, I don't know. Let's keep going.
Yeah, and as Forteans, we got to talk about that. They were actually figures in popular culture, right? I mean, Keel showed up on David Letterman. David Letterman was asking him, what's a Fortean?
What is a Fortean?
What is a Fortean? He spells it. It's Fortean. And then, of course, you can't deny, Vallée's position in the UFO world when they made Close Encounters, the movie, where they had the French scientist there who was based on Vallée.
Yeah. And Vallée said he talked to Spielberg about having it be interdimensional in the movie and thought that it would be more appropriate.
Yeah,
And
right.
Spielberg wanted to go with E.T. because it was,
Of
closer to
course.
pop culture. And then, of course, there's a bunch of conspiracy theories about that someone got to Spielberg and made him say E.T.,
Oh,
right?
oh, okay. I didn't know that.
I don't know too much about the Spielberg conspiracies, but there's a bunch, and he did seem to have some sort of insider access, which would
Hmm.
make a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, I could have mentioned earlier when we were talking about Kirk that his father's name was James Kirk.
Do do
No,
do
yeah,
do.
I don't know if there's any relation to James T. Kirk from Star Trek. But as Forteans, it's there. It's not maybe to say Fortean or to say just the name Charles Fort doesn't bring up a lot for a lot of people. But
Yeah.
it's there and they don't know it basically.
Oh, and Lauren Coleman. We should mention the work of Lauren Coleman as well, who is probably the Fortean who's collected the most cryptid data.
Hmm. Right.
Traveled around the country, dare I say the world, following giant birds. What a great job.
Yeah. Right.
People are like, how do I do that full time?
Right. Right.
Well, the answer
And can I
is we have no friggin' idea.
right?
This is
And can I wear a cloak at the same time? Or
I know the answer to that one. It's yes.
it's of course. Please do.
So a lot of Forteans will focus on specific phenomena, and a lot of Forteans' favorite is fairies. And I'm looking forward
Hmm.
to doing our fairy episode. There's another faction that talks about ultra humans, but when they're talking about ultra humans, they're talking about ultra terrestrials. I mean, this is going off into this strange direction of the Fortean Times magazine, which I don't really understand. It doesn't really follow the Fortean timeline of academic research, so I just don't really understand it.
I mean, you're talking about stories that link to like ultra humans, like that are living amongst us,
Yeah, and they give them
and
names and then they develop lore around them. And this was something that
right.
really bothered Keel. So he discusses his own views on the Fortean Times magazine, and he did a couple interviews with them. But he was really bothered by what Forteanism had become and what it was becoming. And
Hmm.
he got a little bitter in the end, and he was like, you know what? It's all us. The phenomenon is all us. Like,
Right.
and there's some truth to that. We've talked about that, about how it's both us and something else. Like, um,
Hmm.
yeah, Keel had a big problem with this movement in ufology as well. He's like, the lore is becoming a religion. People are just falling into the trap, and this is just another
Right.
symbolic trap of the phenomenon. But I'm not even sure if it's a symbolic trap. It's just telling us the same story, and we're not getting the message.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the reason we named it Fortean Winds is because Fortean Winds is a real term that describes certain atmospheric changes. And it's like a surge in energy that gives a feeling of an anomalous nature. And in one of my first contact experiments with one of the other guys from Fortean Winds, who hasn't been on the show, we were sending out a signal, and that was the response we got. The EMF meter went off the hook, and we got this weird anomalous wind, and it was just in our little area, and that's where the name came from.
Man, we're going back to the roots. We've covered so much. You think back, this is our 36th episode. A lot of content there.
Yeah, so in the end, Forteans are data sleuths. I think that we've taken that to the ridiculous degree with our version of Forteanism, but you can add us to the lexicon as well. I think our point of view on what a Fortean is no less valid than anyone else's. We did remove all of the racism that Fort had and Keel had in his work. They're flawed. Like, we're all flawed. Don't look at these people as messiahs or gurus. They were good at
Right.
anomalous research. That's what we know. And we Forteans pride ourselves on calling balls and strikes even. We call things as they are. And we
Yeah.
we follow the work of Thomas Sowell, who said, if you want someone to like you, tell them what they want to hear. If you want to help someone, tell them the truth.
Right. Yeah. Good point. We're all products of our time, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, at this point, I mean, we took ufology and basically said that it's true, right? It's there. Where do we go from here? I don't know. You sit and wait?
Right. So we began this as kind of a UFO show. And I don't really think that that is what we want to continue to be anymore. So we're going to expand it a little bit more. And I guess if you were listening, that's probably what you were expecting anyway. I hope you were expecting a wider range of things to talk about. One of the things that we brought up before was like things about anomalies like sound and just dive into specific aspects about that, you know,
Yeah.
deep dives into that. I really enjoyed the World War II exploration. I got invited to a historians conference, which I would like to go to. That was really cool for me to do some historical research and something more scholarly. So maybe do more of that and less of the UFO stuff. You know, we were talking about the boogosphere and the tridactyls. And the bottom line is that stuff is exciting because it could end up being material evidence of something non-human, right? And that could end up yielding the sorts of change in the public attitude that yield catastrophic disclosure. And the only other thing that would do that would be an appearance by the phenomenon on a really wide scale that is undeniable. And even if that happened once, people would forget about it. So it's going to have to be something pretty big, you know. Don't expect that from all of that stuff. It's not precedented, and this phenomenon doesn't want it that way. And until it does, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, just we're not looking for the means to an end, right? I mean, it's a process. It's an experience.
I don't know. I don't know where to take the show next, and I think that that's a great place to start, right? We were talking about whether we wanted to continue with this and maybe, because to me, that hacking UFO and the episode afterwards, it really was the conclusion of the research that allowed me to get the answers that I was looking for to the extent that I'll ever be able to get them. And so I can continue to talk about it, but no one's there. No one's there with me, right? Like,
right.
And there's no amount of context I'm going to be able to give you, no amount of articles and citations that I'm going to be able to write to have everyone come to that level, right? So I just went too far, you know. Like I thought I was going to prove it, and then I realized that that was a fool's game. So then I said, I'm going to understand what it is and tell everybody what it is. And, you know, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't.
I mean, at this point, what do? We just wait for more physical evidence, really. But what's the point of it, too, when you look at the short history of all that, is that there has been physical evidence for a very long time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like enough is ever enough. So
everything you wanted, you got. You wanted videos, you got them. You wanted pictures, you got them. You wanted medical reports, you got them. You wanted live witnesses in every facet of society, be they scientists, be they politicians. They've all said it. Like, you got everything you ever wanted from the subject for proof. You're never going to believe it. And you're never going to believe what comes after. You're just not ready. Like, the public is just not ready. Like, and don't ask me when you will be. Like, I don't know. It's up to you.
Right. And of course, you got the two schools of thought too. You got the folks that really want to believe, and they want everything to kind of be a conclusion that yes, there's other beings, and of course they're here to help. Was a very popular notion. But then you also have the other side, the folks that believe that that it's malicious, and there's this dark side of the moon conspiracy, and the lizard people. So people have motivations.
Look, I can go into what I know, which is all I'm ever going to get. The explanation that I got, which is, yes, both of those things exist. There is something that we would perceive as malevolent. There is something that we would perceive as benevolent. They are performing a function, right? Mm-hmm. Different humans align with different functions. And that is complex how that all works. You see it play out. You see as above, so below play out every day. There's not a real big difference, but there is a scientific basis for all of it, as well as a symbolic basis for all of it. But that's what I know is there's both. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it can go good or bad. A lot of it is based on your beliefs as to how as to what will happen when you encounter the phenomenon. And there's also DMT in your brain. It's just in there all the time, and it's released when you're under high stress. And so I think what's happening in these psychic abductions, and I still do want to do that episode on abductions, because I can tell you what I know, and that's it. I think what's happening in those psychic abductions is those people are under extreme stress. DMT is being released, and then you're going on a DMT trip. And because people are reporting very similar things in DMT studies. So something's happening there, right? Something both physical and perceived as spiritual.
Right.
And that's not wrong. Like, that's the funny part. It's like religion is just different words. Just different words.
I mean, you go back to the super spectrum, really, you want to talk about the brain, chemicals in the brain. I mean, there's always the notion that we only use, 10% of our brain? Maybe they're just using more of the brain, seeing more of the super spectrum.
Right. There's a pattern that the ones at the top outside of space and time are maintaining. And that requires sometimes things that go good and things that go bad. And it could be either one, but it requires something to change. And when something needs to change in order to keep the pattern in the direction they want it to go, they make it happen. If that requires something that's tragic to us, then that's okay, because that's what needed to happen to maintain the pattern. And that's how they look at it.
Right.
And one of the things they say in abductions is, this comes up frequently: don't stop squirming, stop screaming. We're not messing with your soul. You'll come back. Like, don't worry. Like, this is just for this round or something like that. And that is consistently, we've talked about the evidence for reincarnation. It's very strong in the sense that there are a bunch of kids who keep popping up with memories that they shouldn't have. Right. And they're very detailed. And so that begs some questions, right? There's evidence that would support it. That's all we'll probably ever be able to say in my lifetime. I mean, what is the scientific proof that you would recover?
Right.
From a child that has memories that they shouldn't have from 50 years ago.
Right.
What else were you expecting? When you get way out there on the edge and you go, how did I get here? What happened? Like 6 years ago, I thought none of this stuff existed. I mean, and then when I found out UFOs existed, I thought that they were ETs. Like, what happened? How did I get here? All of the methods that I used for human initiated contact, in my case, I detailed both in the podcast and on the website. I don't think that I need to go through it blow by blow, but it's possible. There's CE5 out there as well. There's things that you could use to have that. But that's what you would have to do in order to really understand the phenomenon better. How many people really want to do that?
Yeah. I mean, naturally, everyone looks for the easy answer, which there aren't any.
You don't want to do that, right?
No, of course not.
See, you just said no, of course not. Now, for me, I was like, okay. And I'm realizing and how many times have I told people, don't say okay. Don't just say okay. And that was something we talked about extensively. I'm right in saying, don't just say okay. Like, there needs to be an initiation. You need to be initiated before contact, or it could go really bad. And whatever form that takes. And I'm not telling you good, bad, ugly, whatever. I'm telling you it's all out there. And whatever you align with, you're going to get. So that's where it goes. So it'll be very interesting for us as we continue in this sort of ambiguous place, which is a great place to start, of where do we go next on this show. I mean, I don't even know what our next episode will be. It's a good way to end it, I guess, for Forteans.
Well, just channeling Fort as we go on our daily lives. Something will come up.
Exactly.
Well, hey, great discussion, Ram.
Yeah.
We'll have more in the future, but this was a good one. Everyone, just thanks for listening again. You could visit the website at forteanwinds.com.
Yeah, this one took a lot of weird turns, but that's very Fortean.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
So I hope it's very clear on what a Fortean is now. At least how to spell it.
Right. All right, well, thanks again.
Take care, y'all.